The agreement was done very amicably with the FA. Apologise to those. Very best.
Was that your last job in football then?
Who knows? We'll wait and see. Thanks, lads.
And playing forward quicker. All this tippy-tappy stuff everybody keeps going on about the right way to play football is all a lot of sometimes.
July 2016, Sam Allardyce had finally achieved what he called his dream job. After decades in football management, he was appointed manager of the England national team, the pinnacle of his career, job he'd always believed he deserved. 67 days later, it was over. A single match, one game in charge of his country, and then humiliation, the shortest tenure of any permanent England manager in history. But this wasn't a tragedy, this wasn't bad luck, this was inevitable. The catalyst was a secretly recorded meeting. Undercover journalists from the Daily Telegraph, posing as businessmen from a fictitious Far East firm, caught England's manager on camera. What they captured was damning. Allardyce, negotiating a £400,000 speaking deal. Allardyce, explaining how to get around the Football Association's rules on third-party ownership of players. Very rules his employer was trying to enforce. Within 24 hours of the story breaking, he was gone. Mutual agreement, they called it. But everyone knew what it meant. His defence was predictable. He'd been a fool, yes, but also a victim. Entrapment, he claimed. Press had set him up. But the official rulings told a different story. Press regulator investigated and concluded the Telegraph's undercover tactics were justified. The findings, they said, demonstrated sufficiently serious impropriety, and while Allardyce hadn't technically broken any laws, he had shown something perhaps more revealing, a disregard for the rules. Not breaking them outright, but skirting them, operating in the grey areas, maintaining just enough distance to claim innocence. This concept of disregard for the spirit of rules while avoiding the letter of the law, this would turn out to be the defining characteristic of his entire career. But there was a detail in the Telegraph investigation that most people missed, a detail that linked this scandal to a much longer pattern. Allardyce wasn't alone at that meeting. Sitting beside him was his agent, his long-time associate, Mark Curtis. For decades, Curtis had been at the centre of allegations surrounding Allardyce. Multiple players, spanning years, had come forward with remarkably similar stories. Stories of pressure, stories of coercion, stories of a manager using his power to push young, vulnerable players toward one specific agent. Ravel Morrison was one of them, a prodigious talent at West Ham, volatile and troubled, but undeniably gifted. Morrison alleged that Allardyce and his captain Kevin Nolan put him under considerable pressure to sign with Mark Curtis. Daily pressure, he said, almost every day. He wanted to go into training to learn, to improve. Instead, he faced endless conversations about an agent he didn't want to employ. Allardyce denied it, called it completely unfounded. Nonsense. But Morrison's complaint wasn't isolated. Journalists noted a fairly astounding pattern of players from Allardyce teams signing with Curtis. And there was something particularly calculated about the Morrison case. The pressure didn't just come from the manager, it came from the captain too. Kevin Nolan, Allardyce's trusted lieutenant on the pitch, was himself a client of Mark Curtis. Created a pincer movement, the boss applying pressure from above, the dressing room leader applying it from within. For a young player, already struggling with personal issues, it was an impossible position. But Morrison wasn't the first. 15 years earlier, there was Kevin Kilbane, 20-year-old at Preston North End, who just received his first international call-up for Ireland. Allardyce, a former coach at the club, reached out, suggested the young player meet with Curtis. By his own admission, still very much in awe of Big Sam. Part of him didn't want to let Big Sam down. Allardyce arranged a meeting at a hotel. Curtis arrived with a pre-written contract. He expected Kilbane to sign there and then, but something didn't feel right. Kilbane refused. Look at the pattern. Both players were in their early 20s. Both were at critical inflection points in their careers. Kilbane, at his first international call-up, naive and in awe. During a period of famed personal instability, described as wayward with a dodgy background. Strategy appears predatory. Identify young, impressionable players. Target them at vulnerable moments. Exploit that vulnerability, whether it's naivety or personal chaos, and channel them toward a preferred agent. This wasn't just about Curtis. A decade before the Telegraph sting, there was another investigation, another undercover operation, this time BBC Panorama. The programme was called Football's Dirty Secrets. Sam Allardyce was at its centre. The allegation was simple and serious. Allardyce, then manager of Bolton Wanderers, had accepted bribes, what they called bungs, from agents in exchange for signing certain players. But as always, the mechanism involved a proxy, this time not Mark Curtis. This time, his own son. Craig Allardyce was a football agent. The agents were secretly filmed claiming they'd paid Sam Allardyce indirectly, channeling money through Craig. Specific transfers were flagged: Tal Ben Haim, Hidetoshi Nakata, Ali Al-Habsi. In some cases, Craig had been contractually banned from participating in Bolton deals, continued to operate anyway. The conflict of interest was glaring. Allardyce's response: indignation, outrage. He announced he was planning to sue the BBC over false and highly damaging allegations. The threat of a lawsuit was loudly broadcast. The lawsuit never came. He later claimed it would cost too much money and take too long. Allegations, as a result, remain legally unchallenged to this day. The Football Association commissioned an official inquiry, the Stevens Report, and once again, the finding was familiar. No evidence of irregular payments made directly to Sam Allardyce. Appeared on a technicality, the report explicitly stated it remained concerned about the conflict of interest that existed between Craig Allardyce, his father, Sam Allardyce, and the club itself. He wasn't found guilty of taking a bung, but he was officially cited for creating the very structure that allowed such allegations to flourish. He had set up his professional life in a way that invited suspicion, using his own son as an agent for his club's transfers. The parallels between 2006 and 2016 possible to ignore. Same pattern, operating through a trusted proxy. First the son, then the long-time agent. Same defence. Public bluster, threats of legal action that never materialise. Same outcome, cleared of the specific crime, but officially censured for the conflict of interest or the disregard for rules. It wasn't just agents and ethics. Allardyce's relationships with his own players followed a pattern too, a combustible cycle. Public support, followed by bitter fallout. Paternalism that flipped to authoritarianism the moment loyalty was broken. El Hadji Diouf is the perfect example. One of the most reviled players of his generation, spitting at opponents, clashing with teammates, allegedly racially abusing a ball boy, but Allardyce defended him relentlessly. When Diouf was charged by the FA for spitting, Allardyce warned him his career could be at stake, then immediately promised all the support he needs. When racism allegations emerged, Allardyce declared him innocent. He claimed to get the best out of Diouf because he commanded his respect. He even used Diouf to attack a rival, claiming Liverpool had failed the player. "We looked after him at Bolton," Allardyce said. "He was left on his own in a strange country. Liverpool slipped up. This cultivated an image, the only manager who understood the troubled star." Privately, Allardyce acknowledged Diouf's self-destructive streak, that he changes during games. The loyalty, it turns out, was conditional. Once their professional relationship ended, protection vanished. Diouf became highly critical of his former mentor, claiming Allardyce was too old, past it, tactically outdated. The same cycle played out with Joey Barton at Newcastle. Allardyce staked his reputation on signing the controversial midfielder for £5.8 million. He personally had to convince the board that he could deal with Barton's notorious off-field issues. This was paternalistic Allardyce, gambling his credibility on his ability to tame a troubled asset. The betrayal came when Barton was arrested in late 2007 for an early morning assault in Liverpool. Allardyce, whose reputation was on the line, reportedly infuriated, admitted feeling let down. Though Barton publicly apologised, the relationship was irrevocably fractured. Barton would go on to become one of Allardyce's most vocal critics, mocking his dinosaur tactics, his long ball methods, his ego. These weren't stories of paternal guidance, but transactional relationships. The defence of troubled players was really a validation of Allardyce's own judgment and man-management genius. The moment that asset became a liability, or worse, a dissenter, the paternalistic protection was withdrawn, and the ultimate sin wasn't off-field trouble. Allardyce had proven he could manage that. The unforgivable sin was ideological dissent, attacking his footballing philosophy. That was a betrayal he couldn't forgive, because Allardyce's conflicts with players who questioned his methods were really a microcosm of his career-long war with the wider footballing world. He cultivated a public persona as the ultimate pragmatist, an identity defined almost entirely in opposition to what he called the philosophers and intellectuals of the game. His tactical style had been the subject of relentless criticism. Direct. Dinosaur tactics. Hoofballs. The most famous jibe came from Jose Mourinho, who after a 0-0 draw in 2014 described Allardyce's West Ham tactics as football from the 19th century. Even Sir Bobby Robson, a revered figure and one of his predecessors at Newcastle, publicly criticised his style, urging him to trust his flair players and play along the deck. Allardyce's defence was a combination of grandiose self-promotion and bitter grievance. He repeatedly claimed his reputation for long-ball football was not founded in fact, and was merely an excuse used by sore losers. His most famous quote served as his thesis. "I would be more suited to Internazionale or Real Madrid. I have always played to the strengths of my squad." In his autobiography, he cemented this grievance, complaining of intellectual snobbery. "They hit a 50-yard ball, it was a cultural pass. When we did it, it was a hopeful hoof." This ideological resentment fueled his most personal feuds. The animosity between Allardyce and Rafael Benitez was a decade-long war of words, described by some as poisonous. The feud's origin was purely tactical. It began in 2004 with what Benitez called his Welcome to England game, a 1-0 loss for his Liverpool side against Allardyce's physically dominant Bolton. From there, it escalated into a war of philosophies. Allardyce, in his autobiography, launched a direct attack on Benitez's greatest tactical triumph, 2005 Champions League final comeback in Istanbul. It had naught to do with Benitez, Allardyce claimed, all about Steven Gerrard. Benitez's retort was famously dismissive and aimed directly at Allardyce's perceived status. Do you know who Sam Allardyce is? Do you know how many trophies he has won? Well, that's my answer. Opinion does not have a lot of value. A similar ideological conflict erupted with Jurgen Klopp. The feud began with a touchline row so heated that police reportedly had to step in. Allardyce's subsequent attacks were personal and ideological. He branded Klopp a soft German, a xenophobic jibe, weaponising the stereotype of hard English football against a foreign philosopher. He then escalated by publicly blaming Liverpool's injury crisis on Klopp's core philosophy, suggesting it was due to the high-tempo pressing game, direct assault on the very tactics that defined his rival's career. These feuds weren't random spats. Allardyce's entire public persona was a culture war. He needed these sophisticated, successful foreign rivals to define himself against. By attacking Benitez's greatest tactical moment and Klopp's core methodology, he was attempting to elevate his own pragmatism above their philosophy. His Inter Milan quote, his cultural pass complaint, these weren't just arrogance. They revealed a deep-seated professional and intellectual insecurity. He believed he was a genius whose work was dismissed as 19th century simply because he was English. But there's a final irony to this career-long antagonism, a contradiction so profound it reframes everything that came after. In the early 1980s, Allardyce was a player at Millwall when George Graham took over as manager. Graham, famous disciplinarian, arrived and began implementing a new, strict regime. In response, Allardyce became a dressing room dissident. He insisted that he would not report teammates who broke Graham's rules. This was an act of rebellion, choice of loyalty to his peers over the new manager's authoritarian demands. The consequences were swift and absolute. Graham immediately froze Allardyce out of the first team. He was placed on the transfer list and allowed to go on a free. Graham agreed to pay Allardyce £15,000 to cancel his contract, a clear power play to summarily execute the removal of a dissenting voice. The man who was frozen out by an autocrat for an act of player solidarity spent the subsequent 40 years as a manager, building a reputation on demanding absolute, unwavering loyalty, not just to the club, but to his tactics, his staff, his man Mark Curtis, his own Big Sam persona. The rebel became the very autocrat he once defined himself against. Players like Ravel Morrison and Joey Barton were frozen out for not falling in line. Ideological opponents like Klopp and Benitez were branded enemies. The dissenter became the enforcer. The 67-day England tenure wasn't an isolated failure. It was the logical and inevitable endpoint of a career built on conflicts of interest, ideological warfare, and a disregard for the rules that he had, for decades, mistaken for strength. Sam Allardyce didn't lose the England job because he was unlucky. He lost it because after 71 years in football, the game finally caught up with him, and the career that began with him standing up to authority ended with him embodying everything he once rebelled against. The dissenter had become the autocrat, and in the end, that contradiction consumed him.